Threshold is a short, independently developed game which promised strong critiques of society, and a story based on real, untold events. Let's look closer at the game's plot, mysteries, and deeper themes. The title screen of Threshold has us in the perspective of someone being buried by a purple-clad fellow. More on that later. The player first chooses an adorably short two-letter name. This is our first dose of political/company critique, emphasizing our loss of individualism in the eyes of those in power. They don't particularly care to know your full, true name. Something short and simple will be easier to remember. You then select a country of origin, which will affect some minor cosmetics such as a fun t-shirt and the flag flying on your base, as well as serves as the difficulty setting of the game. Strongly advertised as a unique country-based system, the mountain top on which the game takes place will be the tallest one in your respective country, and the taller you go, the less oxygen there is to be had. The oxygen, we soon learn, is a huge concern for the clerks. So for example, China, who has the tallest mountain of all of the options, would be the most difficult one. But back into the intro. You start below the mountain in a locker room of sorts, where you can find your personal items, signs pointing towards the company-sponsored dental and lung medical offices, and a fun reference to mouthwashing, another game recently released by Threshold's publisher. The player joyfully submits a contract for their very first job, ironically being very excited to work for their nation's government, and to have a job at all. As you enter an elevator and slowly rise up to the peak of the mountain, where oxygen is far scarcer, the words "Train must run" flash repeatedly, painted on the walls. This is the primary goal of your superiors, and is more important than even your own life. Welcome to the base, says Purple Clerk Mo, who has been working non-stop for the last 16 hours and has blood smothered all over his mouth. That's understandable though, as the higher-ups have been rushing to hire a new yellow clerk to take over the second shift, after the tragic passing of your predecessor, Nai. But it's all cool, you're there now and the job is incredibly easy to pick up, which is especially great since the oxygen levels are so low up here that Mo resorts to writing everything he wants to say instead of speaking. The government pulled an oopsie and didn't give you a notebook to write back with, despite that in your uniform being the only stuff you got to bring up, but it's whatever. You probably shouldn't ask many questions anyway. Mo shows us the primary function of the most boring and stressful job in the country. An endless train runs continuously into a large wall bordering the base, but every so often it begins to slow down, setting off an unpleasant alarm. As the clerk, you must blow a whistle into a large Dr. Seuss-esque horn to signal the train to speed up, until it aligns with the current expected pace, which changes periodically. But holy crap, blowing that whistle takes a lot of oxygen, so much so that you could literally just pass out and die right there. But worry not, your grateful and kind government has bestowed upon you little air canisters, which, when you bite into their sharp-ass glass casing, will fill your lungs with air and your mouth with blood, temporarily. A laser tracking the speed of the train periodically dispenses retro-style tickets which can be traded for more air canisters in the second of 2 buildings present on base. The canister machine has some interesting bloodstains all over it, perhaps from the source of the oxygen being blood-related, or maybe the clerks who got a bit behind having to immediately bite down on their hard-earned canisters. Worry not either way, all you have to do is keep the train running on pace, to collect those tickets on time, to get the air canisters so that you can breathe long enough to blow the whistle and keep the train running on pace. Building 2 also has a recycling machine, likewise covered in bloodstains, but for a more clear reason seen later. It's of note that should the player jump behind the stacks of crates between the 2 machines, they'll find an extra canister alongside a note written in blood. There is another one. Building 1, which you may enter by blowing your whistle into the tube by the door at certain times, contains infinite air in a white, void-like space called the Capital Chamber. There, you can interact with some of the government officials who monitor the base, and are allowed to ask up to 3 questions per visit. Our mysterious bosses don't give a lot of clear answers, but honestly it comes across almost kind, that they're willing to answer anything at all, given how rude and cruel corporate overlords usually are in dark, industrial-themed media like this. But early on we can tell that the base was built on top of a mountain to keep it out of sight, both hidden from your country's people, as well as from tourists, suggesting the government also wants to avoid other nations hearing about what goes on here. The wall functions as the threshold to a waste recycling tower on the other side. The train carries in mysterious cargo, and the tower sends out drinkable water, which starts out very acidic but is progressively filtered down. We also learn that the bosses love Mo, who has been successfully completing his shifts for many years, and that the government kindly decorated the base with a few trees to make you feel more at home. Threshold's environment is heavily inspired by old Russian films, and aims to emphasize a rough industrial work cycle that prioritizes productivity and functionality over the comfort or health of its employees. The buildings and machines are worn down, the view primarily in murky shades of brown, green, and red. The beeping and alarms heard throughout the game are unpleasant and mechanical. We aren't allowed to know what the train carries, despite it being the whole point of your job, even despite the physical risk of biting into glass and constant risk of death. The canisters themselves were chosen by the company instead of larger pods because the pressure was easier to handle, less risk of exploding and causing damage to the base, even though their design is horrendous for the clerks. But that's fine, of course, since the government offers dental and lung care. You can imagine, though, that the doctors, also being employees of the government, are biased in what they would declare a totally healthy set of punctured glass-filled gums. Further exploring the base, you can find some places where, if you look at one spot for long enough, a short scene will play out. In lore, these are panic attacks, or oxygen-deprived hallucinations. Looking into the pipes at the base of the water has the camera slowly stare into the player's face. Looking into a hole in a stone wall reveals an ominous statue. A duck will eventually jump out of the entrance, and the hole collapses with a small gust of air, implying there was a tunnel of sorts inside. This duck will proceed to follow you around for the rest of the game, and is even able to be named and held if you interact with it enough times. Entertainingly, Mo is very unhappy if you get the duck in front of him. Staring at the tower across the wall or the train's speed tracker both cause slow close-ups. And looking at a rickety wooden structure above the train will flash an image of a yellow clerk hanging by his neck. This is probably your predecessor, Nye, whose story is unveiled via little hints around the base. Mo eventually instructs the player on other aspects of the job, such as using a bucket to filter white matter out of the produced water, emptying out the locked outhouse, and to gather wood to repair the base. While gathering planks, you notice some partially constructed scaffolding against the wall, and what seems to be a very shallowly dug grave at the base. The gravel leading up to the grave being tinted red, similar to the gravel leading up to Building 2. Mo reveals that Nye, the last yellow clerk, had been rebelliously trying to climb over the wall, and had illegally entered the observatory, the rickety wooden structure above the train, to take a peek at what the train was carrying. Information which clerks are not supposed to be given until they are at least a year into service. But Nye accidentally fell from the structure and died, forcing Mo to dig him a grave and wall off the observatory. The earlier mentioned hallucination showing him hanging, rather, reveals that Mo and the bosses wish to cover up his death, either because it reveals that the train's cargo is so disturbing as to drive a man to suicide, or perhaps because they ended him themselves if he threatened to reveal the information. Nye's story is somewhat elaborated on in Threshold's demo, which serves as a short prequel to the game. In the demo, we play as Nye on his first day on the job, which chronologically was only a few short days prior to the player and Threshold replacing him, revealing that the yellow clerk before him had also mysteriously required replacement. On Nye's first day, looking at the country flag gives the text "Our flag means death," and Nye quickly notices blood trailing into a blocked-off Building 2. Mo says there was a crate collapse inside, but peeking through the front of the building shows something appearing to be bleeding out inside. Perhaps a bird of some sort? The demo ends as Mo uses his first air canister, but we know that he went on to search the base and wall for information whenever possible, leaving behind some blood-written notes for the next clerk. The job of clerk is primarily to blow a whistle, ironically making them literal whistleblowers, a term used to describe someone who spreads information on a person or company engaging in wrongdoings, often gaining said information by working on the inside. Nye, most likely, got the job specifically to reveal dark secrets of this mysterious government establishment, which placed itself so far away from the eyes of others, and required the bare minimum staff to sign non-disclosure agreements. However, after finding what he was looking for, he soon died and was buried right on campus. The title screen could then be from Nye's corpse's perspective, or perhaps another prior yellow clerk, as the cycle of them starting, dying, being buried, and replaced continues. But back to the main game. The player can use a bucket on the grave to reveal Nye's hand, which holds the key to the outhouse. Using the bucket to empty out the waste reveals a bonus canister of air. Should the player climb on top of the outhouse, however, they reveal the second of Nye's blood notes, reading, "I will hide it somewhere safe," relating back to the "there's another one" note from before. Continuing their work, the player eventually finds a stray fish in the water, which the bosses claim must have come from some higher water pool. Putting the dead creature into the recycling machine gives you an air canister ticket, its ability to grind up animal bodies possibly explaining why it has blood all over it. Once the player has collected enough wood, they can wait until Mo is not present and begin rebuilding the path to the observatory. Once inside, they lean over the edge and witness a cutscene revealing the oh-so-mysterious contents. Each train car is filled with blood and animal corpses, offering a gruesome sight and disgusting reveals as to the source of the water the people rely on. Turning around, you find the final note from Nye, "In my mouth." Then you spot Mo, who sprints to the boss's building, having seen you illegally learn of the contents. Following him into Building 2, the bosses reveal that the recycling tower across the wall uses incredible amounts of farm animal remains to create fresh water, which is then filtered and spread to the people. Screenshots of world lore that you can see in the developer's social media or on the game's Steam page activity show that in-game, water shortages have become more dire, and that the government has been putting out propaganda ads covering up the increasing damage to animal life occurring as a result of their actions. The overall implication being that the government chose to sacrifice obscene amounts of animals in order to uphold the water supply, while keeping the source hidden from its citizens to avoid A, protest against the intense loss of life, and B, disgust at the thought of drinking fluid squeezed out of a corpse. The bosses raise up Mo as an ideal employee, one who is able to disconnect his emotions from the work that needs doing, hence finding a balance between any amount of guilt he may feel for playing a part in this incredible loss of life, and convincing himself that he is not at all to blame since he did not personally partake in the killings, being only a guardian of the wall. The game is hence commenting on the idea of dissociation, in which lower laborers can avoid feelings of guilt from an atrocity via detaching themselves from the crime itself. This mindset is common throughout history as a driver behind tragedies, and is a mob mentality defense mechanism when one feels they have no control over what's happening around them. The bosses say that the player may now resign, or accept his duties and continue working. If the player resigns, they attempt to leave via the elevator, which mysteriously collapses, killing them. If they choose to continue on, the bosses cheer your understanding, noting that there are actual genocides happening out there, hence emphasizing the insignificance of non-human life and moral correctness of supporting human survival above all else. Outside the building, the train has reached overbearing speeds, and the corpses of various animals begin to rain down from the wall. Allegedly, when or how many animals rain down is also affected by animal slaughter statistics from your chosen country. This is referred to as the threshold event, a transition from the boring pace of the game thus far to a horrific climax. The title also refers to a crack forming in the wall, as the demand for meat, for water, becomes too intense for the tower to handle, pushing it past its max threshold and causing it to break down. Slowly, the base is filled with the bodies and blood of animals. The player, recalling Nye's notes, can once again use the bucket on his grave to reveal his mouth, which contains a second black whistle. When used, the whistle causes the train to slow down. If used enough times, the train begins to move backwards. shooting out of the wall and revealing that the front had been torn into, as if literally consumed by the wall, invoking imagery of humanity's endless gorging and demand for blood. This vision gives the player the good ending, breaking the bond, which suggests a dismantling of the process and endless consumption, of the people's ability to be silently accepting of the atrocities committed by their leaders. Additional endings of the game are suffocation, the player fails to get enough air canisters and just dies mid-game; crushing, the recycling tower collapses under the intense demand and enough animals rain down to just bury the player; and escape, a secret route in which the player waits until enough animals have fallen to knock over a tree behind Building 2, allowing you to climb onto the roof and out via the rock walls. No matter the ending, a subsequent phone call shows the bosses relaying the wall overflowing and Yellow Clerk's death or disappearance to the nation's respective leader, saying they must deal with the situation but not really seeming too afraid that they can't fix it. They relay numbers in the thousands to millions, which are then also displayed on an ending screen. These numbers, while I was unable to match up the direct figures, are most likely the statistics of animals slaughtered for meat in each country, each hour or day. Fallen specifically refers to animals who died of illness or other causes before slaughter in the farming business, and whose deaths are hence useless as they couldn't even be used for their meat. The saved stat refers to Ducky, who is considered saved if you reach the point of naming and carrying it around before the end. So then, what did it all mean? Threshold focused on several key themes. 1. Government control. The dangers of totalitarianism, of developing leaders with the ability and drive to hide things from the public, to spread propaganda of covering up their atrocities, and who openly disregard the value of individual lives. Threshold also comments on corporations, how companies are often willing to disregard the health and safety of their employees in order to make a larger profit, and, likewise, how the consumer's desire for quick products at the cheapest prices supports that behavior. Another theme is humanity's pursuit of survival, a willingness to destroy other organisms to keep ours running. This is entirely natural to do, of course, given the cycle of life and energy, but we must accept the sadness in it as well. I'm not trying to support, nor do I think the game Threshold is, everyone going vegan and the entire dismantling of animal farming, but we can still recognize the inherent sadness in the mass loss of life, and the inhumane ways in which it is often committed. The pet duck shows how much value and connection we find with some animals, while choosing to completely disregard how cruelly others are treated in especially abusive, mass slaughterhouses. Bouncing off that, Threshold touches on the idea of human dissociation, our ability to remove responsibility for actions which we did not directly commit, such as the murder of tons of animals, even though we contribute to the daily demand, to the increasing of the train's pace and threshold. This ability to ignore responsibility explains why people are able to support wars they will never have to personally fight in, and ignore calls for help from people they are not personally attacking. Threshold utilizes the mouth a lot throughout, both as a tool to display current energy levels, but also perhaps representing consumption. To consume is to live, after all, especially in the case of humans with our propensity to continue indulging even when it's not vital. The clerks, likewise, work through their mouths to support their families and community. They are willing to offer up even their most basic needs to satisfy the job, while at the same time being literally silenced by their superiors. The power balance is incredibly askew, even when the entire purpose of this outpost is to help people like them. So then, we must look at the largest mystery of the game. Threshold was heavily advertised to be based on a true story, which originally I had assumed must be a singular event, something untold which happened, perhaps relating to the meat industry? I searched high and low for an event, trying to find a clearly related instance of maybe whistleblowers dying mysteriously after having revealed damning information. Maybe incidents of animal waste containers exploding in factories and suffocating employees. Perhaps blood raining mysteriously down from the sky. Or animal waste being used to create other products in a gruesome way, etc., etc. But in the end, I suspect the true story might just be a call to action by the developer, wanting players to accept that these themes are directly related to real-world systems. This is not to suggest Threshold is some sort of veganism propaganda, which I think some people might quickly jump to. It does, however, comment on the meat industry as one that is inherently gruesome. We all live amongst the systems of animal slaughter. We all consume their products, and we all, to some extent, benefit from our ability to dissociate ourselves from the killing and poor treatment that periodically make the news. I myself eat meat regularly, and I accept that the meat industry at large is a necessary evil. But that doesn't blind me from the fact that each country systematically kills thousands of animals each hour, and that many corporations place more value in efficient production than healthy and kind environments for the animals as they are bred and raised. The public is always outraged to hear about chickens whose legs are crushed under their own weight, cows unable to move an inch in their entire lives, employees casually injuring animals on a day-to-day basis. Even so, we still, at large, love getting lots of meat cheap at the grocery store. The meat industry additionally contributes hugely to the CO2 and methane emissions that damage our climate. Threshold is a true story warning of genuine dangers in having an all-powerful leaders able to make decisions with huge environmental effects hidden from the public. And the game requests for us to be more conscious of the things we allow to happen, that we must accept some amount of responsibility as people who benefit from those atrocities, as we continue to enable the behavior by contributing to the demand for cheap, convenient goods. This concept carries over into other industries as well. Clothing, for example, is widely accepted to be mass-produced in poorer countries by employees in unsafe conditions for meager wages. This is horrible. But at the same time, consumers put up a huge stink towards the higher prices of more sustainably produced goods. Companies are, of course, a major issue, as in capitalistic societies they want to make things for as cheap as they can and sell it for as much profit as possible. That human greed, which is heavily rewarded in economics, continues to push society to cut as many corners as possible. Ergo, to care less about exactly how their products get made, even if there are better ways. Given everything, we fall back on one word: responsibility. Threshold emphasizes the horrible morals of government and corporate powers, while simultaneously exploring the ways in which the average person might justify their hand in the overall process, just as Mo had found a balance. But in the end, we must be able to accept that things are bad, even if it means also accepting that we are part of the problem, which can be a very hard thing to do. Humans are creatures of convenience, after all, and it is much easier to ignore personal faults, to ignore a need to change. That's not to say that we should spend every waking second drowning in guilt over all the problems with our countries. After all, the more complex human life gets, the more and more difficult it becomes for us to entirely remove ourselves from those systems. We need to eat. We need to be able to afford both shelter and clothing. We naturally crave entertainment through products to bring us joy and connection. It would be incredibly difficult to become entirely self-sufficient without alienating yourself from other people. To relate to the amazing show The Good Place, even a seemingly kind gesture like buying a vase of flowers for your mother can inadvertently make you a player in the vase producer's immoral labor process. Still, at the end of the day, we must be willing to push back against higher powers in pursuit of decency. Or, at the very least, be mindful enough to feel remorse as we benefit from the systems that surround us. Threshold was a short but interesting perspective in animal farming and human nature. It was a lot of fun reading into its various themes. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, feel free to give a like, comment, or subscribe. Until next time, bye.